Welcome back to TCOB. I'm Hass and you're watching part 6 of our 10-part series. Today we'll be looking at the factors that drive the economic cost of Bitcoin. This is one of the longer episodes of the series, so strap yourself in. Before we get started though, I'll keep you in suspense for a few more seconds as we emphasize what I think is the central driver of economic cost: the consistently and constantly relentless network hash rate growth. Let's take a quick look at how the network's grown since 2009. The dramatic drop in dollars per gigahash and watts per gigahash discussed in part 2 of the series has spurred extraordinary hash rate growth. That said, this isn't exactly anything new. Have a look at these numbers. The network has been growing an average of 9% every fortnight since 2012, an average of 7% every fortnight since 2014, an average of 5.9% every fortnight since 2016, and 7.2% per fortnight for the year to date. As a result of the constant hash rate increases, the difficulty cycle is rarely 14 days long. And based on rough year-to-date data, which is about 7.2% increase per cycle, the difficulty cycle is closer to 13 days or 312 hours. Should Bitcoin ever scale and reach its potential, it is almost certain that mining equipment will exponentially increase in processing efficiency in line with Moore's law for at least another 5 years, and exponentially increase in power efficiency in line with Kumi's law for at least another 25. Calculating the cost of Bitcoin can be modeled quite simply through the relationship of these 6 variables, along with the network hash rate: capital expenditure, which I'll be referring to as Capex from here on in, operational expenditure, or OPEX, the difficulty cycle length, miner revenue, electricity costs, and the mining mix. Capex is the capital expenditure required to maintain a proportional share of mining rewards upon an increase in difficulty. The best way to explain this is with an example. Let's say that a mining pool currently controls 30% of the network with a hash rate of 1000 petahash per second. The miner forecasts that hash rate growth for the period will be close to 7.2%, resulting in a total hash rate of 1072 petahashes. Therefore, in order to maintain their 30% of the network, they need to bring on an additional 21.6 petahashes of power for the next difficulty cycle. There are other elements of Capex too, however their life cycles are much longer than mining equipment. These elements of Capex can also be deemed as sunk costs in many cases, and don't affect future decisions. The Capex categories are as follows: Bitcoin mining equipment, which typically lasts only a few months before they're unprofitable; power supply units for mining equipment, which typically last as long as the mining equipment itself due to planned obsolescence, with hardware manufacturers regularly changing the required PCU wattage with each generation of miner. And finally, server racking and data center construction and fit out, which typically lasts for decades. Server racks and data centers could also come under operational expenses, or OPEX, if the data center is being rented or leased. OPEX is the expenditure required to remain operational. At scale, this is effectively just the cost of power to the mining equipment and air conditioning within a data center. It's estimated that cooling can consume 30 to 40% of overall energy consumption, with 21% a benchmark for the most efficient cooling systems in the world. Technologies such as immersive cooling will reduce energy usage, but as a trade-off for a large initial capital outlay. For the purposes of this model, we'll assume cooling contributes to about 20% of the total power consumption, in line with the laws of perfect competition and technological gravitation towards maximum efficiency. This one's pretty easy. Whatever hash rate increases by, cycle length decreases by. So for example, if hash rate goes up 10%, a block will be produced about 10% quicker. As mentioned at the start of this video, the cycle length is about 13 days or 312 hours. This is a fixed number. There are 2016 blocks of 12.5 bitcoins mined every difficulty cycle, for a total of 25,200 bitcoins. In addition to the mining rewards though, mining fees need to be counted too. The SegWit wars of the first half of 2017 had fees averaging over 200 bitcoins per day, and the fee madness during the hype cycle of December 2017 and January 2018 had a revenue average of over 550 per day over these 2 months. With the SegWit wars over and the hype now well settled, a relatively consistent 50 bitcoins per day has been earned in the 6 months leading up to July 31st. This results in a total of about 650 Bitcoins collected in a 13-day difficulty cycle. To evaluate power costs and emissions, we don't have much of a choice but to use worldwide weighted average figures due to the dispersion of miners all over the world. That said, thanks to the rules of perfect competition, particularly perfect factor mobility, miners will just move to the place with the cheapest electricity costs. Although the average rate for US industrial companies for power is about 7 cents per kilowatt hour, a safer assumption for Bitcoin miners will be closer to 3 or 4 cents for the reasons just mentioned. There are several documented cases of the largest Bitcoin operations paying 4 cents a kilowatt hour, with reports that Bitmain was receiving a 2 cent per kilowatt hour rate in their Yunnan facility, and one particular CEO claiming cost of electricity of only 1.7 cents per kilowatt for their mining operation in Moses Lake, Washington, in the USA. There are two types of miners: chip fabricator miners and retail miners. Retail miners can be split further into another two categories: large retail miners and small and individual miners. Small and individual miners can also forego buying hardware themselves and instead purchase mining contracts on the cloud. Due to intellectual property and some economies of scale, chip fabricators or chip fabs can mine for significantly cheaper than retail miners. Typical gross profit margins in the semiconductor industry have averaged over 45% over a 4-year period, with the most profitable ones close to 60%. The computer hardware industry averages around 35%. Gross profit margins are used since operating expenses and depreciation and the like are dealt with separately in the model. It is assumed that miners pay no tax, that is, they retain all coins that are mined, and/or their asset depreciation costs are high enough to offset a large amount of tax on the revenue they've made from selling mining hardware. Due to the lack of competition in the ASIC hardware space, margins would likely be 50 to 60%. Obviously, there's a limit to the margin that can be made on mining hardware, as the customer base is quite savvy and can easily calculate profitability of their purchased miners at a particular price point. For the purposes of this study, it'll be assumed that Bitcoin ASIC manufacturers make 60% gross margin on all hardware sold. Next comes the question of chip fabs mining on their own equipment and how much equipment has made it out into the market for large scale and small scale miners. According to an analysis by Sanford C. Bernstein & Co., it was estimated that Bitmain captured 75% of the market share in hardware sales in 2017. Canaan Creative captured 15% of the market, and other manufacturers made up the remaining 10%. Bitmain's CEO has stated that the company earned $2.5 billion in revenue for 2017, so we can size the market for mining hardware to be about $3.3 billion. Based on the 2017 average price of an S9 miner of around $3,000, one could draw the conclusion that about 1 million S9 equivalent mining units were shipped out in 2017. The current hash rate and price per S9i, this model estimates that roughly $115 million is invested in more mining power every difficulty cycle, or around $3.25 billion per year. Drawing on the 80-20 rule again, we can put chip fabs somewhere in the ballpark of 20% of direct hash power. That said, with Bitmain administering at least two mining pools, Antpool and BTC.com, providing 40% of hash power, it is likely that they contribute about half of that power directly or more. Throw in the other chip fabs in proportion to the sales figures mentioned above, as well as any chip fabs that don't sell to the public, and we will assume that chip fabs provide at least 35% of direct hash power for this study. Due to the laws of perfect competition discussed earlier, it can be assumed that only the most profitable miners are switched on at any given time, and that when a new generation of mining equipment is released, equilibrium is reached very quickly, where all miners are operating at a similar cost basis. Next week, we'll have a look at the drivers and assumptions used to model environmental costs, and after that, you'll be ready to start calculating. As always, thanks for watching. Click like and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment below. Check out the links in the description for more info and references, and catch us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Medium for more. Until next time.